and we should be back live. Sorry about that, folks. I had talked to Ustream the other day, and since they are a live broadcast TV network, they actually have had folks that they've been attacked by, I guess some of the I don't know, maybe the Russian government, but they've had some folks that were broadcasting things off of them that actually have caused some issues with the system. So possibly that's what happened. So hopefully we won't have any more glitches like this today. But anyway, Mitch, can you pick up where you were on your conversation?
Yeah. So as I was saying, one of the things that I spent time with advisors to do right from the get-go, and it helps to define what it is they have been doing up until this point. Some advisors, they come to us and boldly say that they're a clean slate. They recognize that what they were doing in the past wasn't necessarily working, and they want to come up with some new strategies. But what I like to do is I like to do a screen share with them, and what we do is we go to their clients' holdings, and so we dig into where it is that they actually have all their AUM held across the board. And you can do this a variety of different ways, whether it's your assets are parked at LPL or TD or Schwab and all that. All these different custodians, they have views that allow you to see every single asset, either in bulk, what's the total amount that you have in a particular mutual fund or stock, or that some actually drill down, so you can see not just how much money do you have in something like Apple, but you can see all the accounts where that's held. And that information is very, very valuable from someone like us coming in to be able to assist advisors to define a new process. And the reason for that is because it gives us immense clarity as to the number of securities that you've been using up till this point, how things are sort of allocated. And what I've done a number of times with advisors, I've actually gotten in there with them where we're looking at a particular mutual fund or an ETF, and I'll ask the question with them, why are you using this mutual fund? Tell me about why you have this mutual fund. And as we start going through the list, we start from the top down. We'll go from the largest holdings that they have across the board, and we'll find out why it is that they're using a particular mutual fund. And inevitably, we'll get a couple securities down, and we'll see that there's been some overlap. There might be a couple different mutual funds that they may have a large portion of their assets in these, let's say, a large cap growth mutual fund, but really most of it is in a different one. And we start talking about how there's overlap in some of the securities, and we try to consolidate that list down into common strategies or common buckets that fit a theme. And I couldn't tell you, Bob, how many times that I've had a conversation with an advisor, and when we actually look and see how many different securities they have across the board, they knew that it was somewhat out of hand, but they didn't even realize how many securities that they've been utilizing.
Right.
Literally hundreds of securities that they've had it spread across all their accounts that they just didn't have a handle on.
Right. So that's one of the things, folks, that happens when you start to define the practice a little better, as you find out that you have a lot of assets. We have seen walked into practices that Mitch was talking about that have literally hundreds of different types of mutual funds in there. And in the reality is that this is interesting because we did a SQL query of everything that custom built portfolios. In 2.0, there's about 3,300 portfolios there. And an expert, I think it's closer to 5,000 or 6,000. So we have close to 10,000 unique portfolios. And when we start looking at what you folks use to build these with, there's a lot of common symbols, especially when it comes to ETFs. It's a pretty typical set. It's almost like Global Equity 4. You've got, the typical items there that are in that strategy, but you also will have something like maybe an alternative class, maybe gold or REITs or something of that sort. So there tends to be a blend. And I think we don't want to get into that today as far as talking about that, but that's one of the things. By defining the practice and getting it down and get it manageable, then one of the things that's not on this screen when you're talking about process that should be is scalability. You start to bring huge scalability. We've helped practices that were largely hodgepodge, just all over the place. It was almost, I call it the favorite mutual fund of the week mode, that a new customer walks in and oh, let's buy this and that, and it looks like there's not a lot of thought behind it. Maybe there is, but from our view, when we look at it, it looks like there's not a lot of thought about what's went into these strategies. And like Mitch was just talking, when you start to hone down and look through the practice and evaluate what you're doing, it's very revealing in a lot of cases. And then you can start to see there's an illusion that more is better. And in the case of VPM, it's less is better to a point, and you want to have concentrated bets in these symbols, and then with a good solid sell discipline, you want to be able to rotate the assets as they change. So it's not that, in my opinion anyway, if you could get somewhere between a 7 and 9% compounded rate of return, regardless if the market's up or down in any given year, when you start to look at 3, 5, and 10-year windows, you have done a great service to your clients. The whole benchmarking thing is another subject that needs to be covered. But really, this hodgepodge and this massive amount of assets, we've run across practices that it literally took them weeks to change an allocation because they had to figure out who had what and what needed to be moved and what they were going to buy, and it's terrible. And the hardest part is, especially some of you have a little larger practice, maybe you have three to five, maybe 10 or more employees, and you've got these administrative staff that are just getting stressed, and they're literally working 6 hours a week, and maybe they see you going to play golf on Saturday when they're working trying to get the allocation. I'm just saying that there's a lot of stress that comes into the practice, both from the transaction standpoint, the cost of trying to do that. You start looking at cost hours and the staff and all that, so it gets pretty bad. Let's move on to the next screen. And this is something I have talked about forever, and discipline. If you go into Webster's and look at the definition for discipline, it's adhering to a state of order or a set of rules to bring about a desired result. So if you don't have everything defined really well, and as we go through talking about a process, this is defining your mission statement for your firm that matches the mission statement for your customers and your products, and then you get all this stuff down. Excuse me. So you have this entire wrapper around your business, and things happen. The practice will run amazingly smooth, and it's about authenticating the practice that way that gives you the confidence to be able to do that walk your talk thing and be able to move things forward. So discipline cannot be achieved without a complete structured environment. And so if there's not a state of order or state of rules, and that's what we're talking about, you're not going to be disciplined. What's going to happen is you're going to start to see biases. When we start talking about building portfolios next week and the weeks beyond, even in ETFs, there's little bias comes in that we all develop attitudes. The whole attitude and opinion thing that comes up really starts to come into play. So discipline, the structure, the rules that you're going to put in place are really going to allow you to move forward. So as we go to the next screen, we start talking about developing the process.
Well, Bob, one thing off that too, going back to what we said just 2 slides ago, the what do you believe? I think it's incredibly important that, as we had said, that the process matches up to their beliefs, because if they don't believe it, they're not going to be disciplined to follow the process. And that's true with anything in life.
I agree, Mitch. That is absolutely true. So as we start to look at developing the process, and we start to talk about, I touched on this already, is developing your company's mission statement. One of them, it needs to be fairly focused, and you need to make decisions whether you're truly a dynamic type advisor and you're managing the money, or you're more passive and doing allocations. It's okay. That's whoever you are is what that is and what you believe in. We're not here necessarily to change those beliefs. We happen to think there are better ways to approach the market, but that becomes irrelevant if those are your beliefs and how you want to do it. We'll help you do the best that you can within that environment. The problem with allocations, you tend to be overinvested when those assets are going down, unless you're willing to use the VPM sell discipline to fully get out. If you folks have used any of the VDOS products or on Expert using the the VDOS, which is the virtual dynamic allocation strategy, gives you the ability to move these assets and do a min max where you could sell out. If VPM gives a sell, instead of selling everything, you can go in and out at half. In the end, it really doesn't work out to add a lot of money, but it does emulate a process which some folks believe in, and that's part of what we do as well. So let's look at in the company's mission statement. I think when these first two lines, what's the mission statement for the products? And the product mission statement comes out of identifying who your customers are and all the things that we talked about earlier, what you know, what you believe, and then who your customers are. And maybe you don't like, I shouldn't say not like your customers, but you want to build your business in a different way. So you start to migrate. There's a lot of things you can do to migrate your practice to a different style niche, or maybe you want to work towards larger clients or whatever that might be. I happen to believe that you're going to do better if you have ability which to handle anybody that walks through your door. I know we have good friends and clients of mine for a long time that have a friends and family type deal. So they don't care how much money you have. If you've got a kid and he's got $2,000, they're going to take it in and put it in something and do something with it. They're not going to turn anyone out. So that's their referral program, I think, has been pretty successful at doing that. Everybody has a different way. Some folks want to do just big accounts. You do just big accounts. When big accounts leave, they have a little more bite. There's a lot to be said from a diversity standpoint of having your practice built around a medium-sized practice. You want to have the big accounts, but you want to make sure that the big accounts. I once upon a time I had one account that was over 30% of my revenues way back in the 80s, and that was pretty scary if that account left. It was a lot to rebuild to get that going again. The next stage, by defining the strategy, what you're going to end up with is the first step towards structure. And I'm not sure a lot of you have done that. When we do get involved and starting to look at the type of things that you're doing, we find that there's a lot of deviation. There's some of these, what I call emotional biases that come in, and it starts to affect how the money's being raised and how the money's being managed, and when trades come in. And that can be pretty detrimental to overall, because in the end, if you look at, let's say you backtest a portfolio and it looks good, if you don't do all the trades, that's not what you're going to get going forward. So all the winners and losers and all that are what come together. In the next meeting or two, I'm sure we will be bringing out a graph that we call the trade impact chart, which shows what the impact is of all the good and bad in trades and how it builds the equity over time. It's a pretty revealing chart. We're working on ways that we can get that out for a broad view of a lot of portfolios, all of our portfolios that are out there. But it's so important, I'm going to beat this just a little bit, that we make sure that your strategies are matching your beliefs. And as long as you have that and everything's in line, when you sit down with a client, you're going to know a couple things: that you believe in what you're selling them, and then you're also going to understand that you are absolutely doing what you told them. Otherwise, you're going to be, doing what you sold. And we've seen folks that have great words, but when you look at what they're doing, there's so many overrides and deviations and who knows what, that they get themselves in trouble ultimately, because they end up, if they even come to us, they'll, if they were willing to admit that they've gotten themselves in that place, we'll go back and try to rebuild and get the structure back in place. But once you start to deviate, it's like anything. It's like cheating or getting away with something, or you feel like you got away. I think the worst thing is that you deviate and you get rewarded a little bit for it. It causes more deviation and ultimately at the end, you don't even have a process anymore. You're just guessing. You might as well buy you a good dartboard and maybe make sure they have the plastic needle so you don't hurt yourself when you get angry at some of the decisions you make. So let's go to the next screen here. Bitch, do you have anything on that before?
Yeah, the analogy I often use when it comes to deviating from a process, it's like going to Las Vegas and putting money in a coin machine. One of the first things that that can happen. It can be very dangerous. Is actually to make money off that first pull of the lever, and you know, whether it's greed or curiosity to cause that person to put the coin in a second time and pull the lever, and then lo and behold, more money comes out. So two times in a row, they've been able to cheat the system. They went into the casino knowing that the odds were against